When you meet Akshay Kumar, are you going to ask him the words that you uttered, FU, were they really uttered in history?
There's so much polarization. There's so much strife. There's so much oppression. Even today, we need those heroes again.
History पर फिल्म्स काफी बन रही हैं. Some films work, some films don't work, despite a lot of publicity.
At the end of the day, the audience decides, right?
I want to ask you here something about Kesari 2 trailer. There was also a topic on social media yesterday and some of the reviewers, on YouTube, that the scene which they have shown very dark and they have not shown the trauma and the torture. They are questioning that, has that been shot actually and then darkened? Or is it just
the early scene that says these visuals are too traumatic to show?
Yes.
I think that that's just a device for the trailer. I don't think that you're going to see that in the film. But look, the final edit is up to, this is an editor's medium and they decide what they want to do. I think that you're going to see a lot of disturbing images in the film. I think that it's an important film because it is counter perspective to the British perspective that the world accepted for so long. It also is giving a real visceral sense of why the empire crumbled and why it should have crumbled. And in that film, I play someone who is legitimately trying to move towards Indian self-rule. He is someone who, if the Amritsar massacre hadn't happened, history might view him differerly, because Lord Chelmsford, he's the viceroy of British India, he introduced these pivotal reforms towards Indian self-rule. But the Amritsar massacre and the aftermath just destroyed all of his efforts, and as it should have, because it showed just how insane the British Raj was. But I like the fact that I've been able to play this character in this film, such an important film, that gives this side of the story.
So when you meet Akshay Kumar, are you going to ask him the words that you uttered, FU, were they really uttered in history?
I'm going to ask him, sure. I really do wonder whether or not Sankaran Nair said FU in court. I'm going to look that up. We had an interesting conversation when we were shooting, when the generator kept going off. And he's like, well, this is actually quite historically accurate, because at the time that we were shooting, the time period that we're shooting, electricity was being introduced to India. And so it would make sense that the lights would go on and off from time to time because they were unreliable. So I'm sure he knows the answer to the question. So it's probably best that I just ask him.
Have you all spoken amongst yourselves, the cast of Kesari 2?
After shooting? No. So I have actually been, I've been traveling. I just arrived back in India about a week ago. And I have been in West Bengal shooting my next feature there. My next Hindi feature starts in June. So I actually did my ADR. I did my dubbing for Kesari in South Africa, because I have a studio there that I work with. In fact, all of these upcoming films, Lucifer 2, David Chaudharani, and Pule, as well as a couple of my upcoming films, they were all dubbed in Cape Town, South Africa. It's just kind of where I am when I'm not actually on screen shooting.
I'm just going back to that dark scene, enveloped with darkness. What you are saying is that particular image is just one which has been used in the trailer, but there are various other scenes which have been shot to depict the horror.
Yeah, that's my understanding. Look, I from what I have seen, I've seen essentially what I needed to dub. I have not seen the full film start to finish. I'm very excited to see it. But my understanding is that there will be visuals that will be disturbing. This is not a film that shies away from the horror of what happened. And for that reason, I think that it's a film that should be widely seen. You know, Ram Madhavan just recently did a series called Birth of a Nation. And Ram and I had worked on Arya, the series with Sushmita Sen and so many others on Disney. And I think, look, you know, this Amritsar Massacre is the foundation of two big budget, big name projects in the span of just a few months because it was such a pivotal moment, and because it was such an important moment, and because it really changed the course of Indian history and world history also to an extent, because the reaction that the British had against what had happened also changed their perspective entirely. They could pretend that what they were doing was justified until this and the Bengal famine and a number of other pivotal events. But yeah, it's my understanding that this black frame with these images are too disturbing to show is just a device for the trailer, and over that you have the audio that was recorded or was engineered to actually go along with the scenes.
History पर films काफी बन रही हैं. मतलब I think there are many films which are also still in the making. How do you see this trend? I mean, some films work, some films don't work, despite a lot of publicity.
At the end of the day, the audience decides, right? Publicity can only get people into the theater, but once they see it and they tell their friends and they put it on social media, and if the reviews from the people are not good, then people stop going. It doesn't matter how much publicity, doesn't matter how big a star. The people's voice matters more and more and more every day because of the ease with which we can communicate. Social media has changed everything. And in a way, that's a good thing.
But there are a plethora of reviews. I mean, how do you judge?
Well, I think you have your favorite reviewers. Like, I'm always interested to hear what Vickey Lalwani thinks about a film. I'm not so interested in some other reviewers who I don't feel like we align in terms of our perspective on film. The best review for me would be to hear from my favorite directors about what they think about a film. And I often do this. It used to be that before I would do a film with a director, I'd watch 2 or 3 of their previous films. Like, for example, before I did Urmi with Santosh Shivan, I watched Before the Rain, which was phenomenal. And I watched Tahan, which was also amazing. So that when I got on set, I could have a conversation, because I was obviously doing films for the joy of acting, but also doing films for the joy of being a part of making films. So I wanted to be informed about the director's previous work. So for me, the most important review comes from someone with whom I agree on cinema. Because you're always going to find people that like a film and people that equally hate a film. It just depends which side of that coin do you fall.
I wanted to ask you one more question on this historical films. I want to know what you feel about so many historical films coming up in today's polarized atmosphere, polarized environment in our country.
Polarized in what sense? You mean politically polarized?
Yeah, I mean, there are just 2 divisions. It has got polarized.
But you mean political polarization, or you mean societal polarization? What kind of polarization?
Both.
Because look, in the US, we have a very, very, very big, massive political polarization between the right and the left. And it's actually getting quite terrifying to watch what's happening in the US from abroad. And it's very unsettling. But look, I think that historical films are extremely important in India because the history is so recent, or at least the stories that we're making here are built, whether it's Vatan, Mere Vatan, or Kesari 2, they're built in a time period that is only a generation to a generation and a half ago. Our grandparents were involved in some way in these events, or they were spectators to them. And that to me is fascinating. The fact that India is such a young country, that 1 generation ago the country was founded, is truly just, it's like as if my grandparents knew George Washington, the founder of the United States. That blows my mind. So this is a period out of which heroes rose, out of which lessons were learned, out of which incredible stories were forged. It's very similar to the United States. We have an obsession with World War II. Whether it's Saving Private Ryan or a host of thousands of other films we've made about World War II and Vietnam, films about further back past, like the Civil War and Revolutionary. Yeah, those happen, but not as often because it's not as recent. People can't really relate to them as much as they can to things that happened within their lifetimes or their parents' lifetimes. So I think that's why we'll continue to make films set in the colonial era, because it gives such a great canvas upon which to paint a story, but also to paint a fictional story. But also there's so many non-fictional stories. There's so many true stories that came out of that period that you can go on making films about that era forever, and it'll never get old. So that to me is the reason why, and I'm thankful for it, because look, I'd say 1/3 or so of my films and series are set in the colonial era. It's just a fact. I mean, it's a a function of the way that I look and the types of films that are made. And it really has been like a masterclass in Indian history for me to do these films. Like I have really learned so much, not about Subhash Chandra Bose by doing Bose Dead or Alive, the Chittagong Uprising by doing the film Chittagong, E Vatan Mere Vatan, learning about Congress radio, now with Kesari 2, the Amritsar Massacre, Pule, learning about women's education. Like every time I do a historical project, I learn something incredibly fascinating about Indian history. So much so that I am incredibly proud of Indian history and incredibly proud of the people that rose up in these times of turmoil and upheaval and oppression. Like there are some incredible heroes, many of whom we've never heard of. And so I hope that we keep making movies about people like Jyotiba Phule, Savitribai Phule, because they deserve to be known and because their story can inspire us today to do something similar to what they did then, because we still need heroes today. Because as you've pointed out, there's so much polarization. There's so much strife. There's so much oppression. Even today, we need those heroes again. And where do we find inspiration? We find them from these stories that we're making about that period that we can relate to today.